Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking one of psychology's absolutely most famous studies, and the pretty massive controversy surrounding it. If you've ever taken an intro to psych class, or honestly just existed on the internet, you've probably heard the terrifying story. Ordinary college students turn into absolute sadistic monsters the second you put them in a fake prison. Well, today, we're totally flipping the script on the Stanford Prison Experiment. We're going to view it through a highly critical lens, zeroing in on the academic ethics and the historical controversies that have recently turned this classic narrative completely upside down.
So, Dr. Philip Zimbardo's ultimate, chilling conclusion was pretty simple. It's not the bad apples, it's the bad barrel. The idea was that if you give regular, healthy people a mask of anonymity and absolute power over others, they won't just bend the rules, they will actively become evil. And for decades, right, this wasn't just some fringe theory. It was treated as undisputed scientific fact. People used it to explain real-world atrocities from historical conflicts all the way to the abuses at Abu Ghraib.
Section 1. The infamous prison experiment.
Okay, so let's look at how incredibly fast this situation devolved into total chaos. Day 1 kicks off with actual real-life Palo Alto police conducting surprise arrests on the participants. Literally, by day 2, the prisoners are already rebelling. They're tearing off their number tags, they're barricading themselves in cells. The guards retaliate by blasting them with fire extinguishers and stripping them naked. It's wild. By day 6, the psychological abuse was so intense, and the guards' behavior so brutal that a visiting researcher named Christina Masloch was just utterly horrified. She confronted Zimbardo, and the entire planned 2-week study was abruptly shut down.
No. Zimbardo claimed that these specific situational elements alone caused ordinary young men to become sadistic. Think about the setup. You take 24 seemingly normal guys. You give the guards mirrored sunglasses so you can't see their eyes, so total anonymity. You strip the prisoners of their names, replacing them with numbers, total depersonalization. And you hand the guards absolute power over basic human needs, like using the bathroom. The official story has always been that this specific cocktail of conditions organically awakened a hidden wellspring of cruelty inside these college students.
Section 2. The ethical nightmare.
But here's the thing. By modern standards, academic ethics simply did not exist in this basement. The participants never consented to being arrested in public by real cops. Plus, when participants wanted to leave, they were essentially told they couldn't, which is a massive breach of their contract. But the absolute biggest red flag, Zimbardo made himself the prison superintendent. He wasn't some objective scientist observing from afar through a two-way mirror. He was an active authority figure inside his own experiment, totally losing his own objectivity as the days wore on.
You've probably heard this audio before. Breakdowns like this one literally forced the implementation of modern ethical review boards. It sounds like he totally lost his mind. But, actually, scratch that. Here is the ultimate historical plot twist. Decades later, the prisoner who agonized here, Douglas Corpy, admitted he completely faked this breakdown. Why? Because he originally thought he'd be able to just sit in a cell and study for his grad school exams. When the guards took his books away, he threw a tantrum just so he could go home and study. Now, Zimbardo maintains he had to treat the breakdown as real at the time. But regardless of who is right, the sheer lack of guardrails in this basement directly led to the strict ethical committees we rely on in science today.
Section 3. Questioning the official narrative.
To really understand this whole controversy, we have to talk about demand characteristics. This is basically the arch nemesis of behavioral psychology. If a participant knows what the scientist is looking for, they will consciously or subconsciously act out that role to help the study succeed. Critics, like journalist Ben Blum and researcher Thibault Texier, argue that the Stanford prison guards weren't naturally becoming evil, they were just following the script they thought Zimbardo wanted them to perform.
Looking at both sides neutrally, this is the absolute heart of the modern debate. Zimbardo claims the cruelty was organic, but recently uncovered audio tapes from the experiment show the undergraduate warden, David Jaffe, pulling a guard aside and basically telling him, "Hey, you're not being tough enough. We need you to be firmer for the experiment to work." If an authority figure is literally telling you to be mean for the sake of science, it's not organic evil. It's just following orders, right?
You can see demand characteristics in action perfectly with guard Dave Eshelman. Nicknamed John Wayne by the prisoners for his extreme cruelty, he was actually a theater student. He literally borrowed his southern accent and swagger from a movie character in Cool Hand Luke. He didn't lose his mind to the dark side. He explicitly stated later that he thought he was doing his job as an employee to give the researchers the dramatic results they were paying him for.
And then there's the initial screening itself, which may have inherently biased the experiment from day one. Zimbardo claimed his subjects were perfectly average, but a 2007 study found that the exact kind of person who volunteers for a quote-unquote prison study already scores significantly higher in aggression, narcissism, and authoritarianism than someone who volunteers for a generic psychological study. The barrel might not have spoiled the apples, the ad might have just recruited apples that were already prone to bruising.
Section 4. Modern Replications and Tests.
So what happens when modern scientists remove the demand characteristics? Well, the results change completely. In an ethically sound 2002 replication backed by the BBC, researchers created the prison but gave zero instructions to the guards. And what happened? Crickets. Nothing dramatic happened. The guards didn't organically become tyrants. In fact, they were kind of uncomfortable with their power. This strongly implies that tyranny doesn't just emerge from a vacuum, it requires a toxic leader directing things from the top down.
In a more recent demonstration, the YouTube series Mindfield completely isolated these variables to see if good people would actually use their power to harm an opposing team. They designed this really ingenious, completely ethical test. No fake prison, just a pitch-black room for ultimate anonymity. No names, just numbers. And they gave participants a button to blast a competing group with a horrible noise, going all the way up to an unsafe level 12. They wanted to see, if we give you complete cover, absolute power, and zero instructions, will you become cruel?
Zero, not a single time. Without an authority figure telling them to be mean, participants completely refrained from abusing their power, even when they knew absolutely nobody would ever find out who pushed the button.
What's wild is that even when provoked with noise 44 times, the participants' moral personalities rose above the situation. In Phase 1, with no instructions, they hardly pressed the button at all. In Phase 2, when the experimenters introduced demand characteristics by telling them that pressing the button was their task, the presses definitely went up, but crucially, they still never crossed the line into cruelty. They never went past the safe level 5. Now, to be totally fair, Dr. Zimbardo actually responded to this test. He argued that because Mindfield specifically recruited people with high moral compasses, it broke the power of the situation. And, that's a really fair point to consider in this academic debate. How much does your individual personality shield you against a bad environment?
Section 5. The True Science of Evil.
So, we can see that while the original experiment's ethics and its pure situational conclusions are highly flawed, it still serves as a super powerful demonstration of how people obey authority. Zimbardo still vehemently defends his stance that situations dominate our behavior, but the modern psychological consensus has definitely shifted. The true lesson of the Stanford Prison Experiment isn't that deep down we are all sadistic monsters waiting to be unleashed. The lesson is that people are highly susceptible to doing terrible things if a trusted authority figure, like a prestigious scientist in a lab coat, tells them that their cruelty is actually serving a noble, greater cause.
Thank you so much for joining this explainer. We're going to leave you to ponder this vital question regarding the true nature of power and human psychology. When we look at corruption, abuse, and systemic failures in the world today, we have to ask ourselves, are we just looking at a bad barrel, or should we be looking a lot closer at the barrel maker giving the orders? The answer might change how we hold power accountable forever. Stay curious, keep questioning the narrative, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.